Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Universal Dialect Show. I'm your host, Chris Cypher 777 Cabrera, and I have a fantastic guest today. And the hits just keep coming and coming. I got another great one for you. This individual, I saw him on, well, not saw him, but I heard him on two of my favorite podcasts, the Higher Side Chats, and also Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli. And the reason why I have him on is because of the things that he was saying, not only because I'm interested in the topics of itself, but they have a connection with me, and we'll get into that. He's a paranormal experiencer plus investigator. He's also an author of an awesome book called The Children of Orion, Finding the Cryptoterrestrials. Welcome, my guest today, Ryan Musgrave Evans. How you doing, my brother?
I'm well, man. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, man. So like I said, I saw you on not saw you, I keep saying seeing you, but I mean, I had to look you up anyway, and I saw you and I saw the awesome beard that you have. And I was like, yeah, I gotta have this dude on.
Discussing the potential for it to be used as a paintbrush as well.
I know, I'm telling you, man, you're like the next level Bob Ross, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, you were on a couple of the podcasts that I love to listen to, and there was a lot of stuff that you were talking about. So first off, you're out of Australia, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I live on the Mornington Peninsula, which is like south of Melbourne. So in Victoria, in the extreme southeast of Australia, the state of Victoria. That's where I am.
Correct or not, is that area? Because from what I understand, there's like it's a hotbed for a lot of paranormal cryptids, UFOs. And you also have like from what I understand, like a version of Area 51 out there.
Yeah, well, sometimes you might be referring to Pine Gap, which is in the middle of Australia, way far away from where I am. But that is a base, US controlled base for the most part. I mean, it's supposed to be, I think, like dual national thing. You get, I think officially, according to the law, 50% of its employees are meant to be from the Australian population, but really it's an American base there. And yeah, it has a lot of association. People in ufology, I think, in the scene suggest that it's like a kind of Australian version of Area 51 in some ways. I think it's an intelligence. Officially, it's like an intelligence gathering hub. And there's the iconic image of Pine Gap is the big they look like golf balls on golf tees, these huge pieces of technology sitting out in the desert that are picking up lots of information from satellites and whatnot. But but Victoria, where I am as well, there's a lot of paranormal activity, yeah, for sure, especially over Bass Strait, the strip of sea between Victoria on the mainland and the state of Tasmania, which is the island there below the mainland. That strip of sea called Bass Strait is paranormal hotspot. Sometimes people call it the Bass Strait Triangle.
Right.
And over the years, huge amounts of aircraft and sea vessels and people have gone missing without trace. Sometimes with trace, but quite often with no trace. And also lots and lots of USO and UFO sightings and things like that around that strip of water there. Yeah, and that's right where I am. I'm in the Mornington Peninsula, so our ocean beach here, back straight onto Bass Strait. Yeah.
And what about like the Yowie? You have incidents of the Yowie out there?
Yeah. There's lots of people that are interested in Yowie hunting and Yowie research and things like that. I haven't touched on a huge amount of that myself personally. Don't know that much about that, but yeah, the Yowie's the Australian version of Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And the word Yowie is from indigenous language. And there are a few different mythical creatures from indigenous traditions in Australia that could conform to fairies or elves and things like that in European folklore, maybe. There's the bunyip, which is a indigenous Victorian word for a kind of non-human entity, which is sometimes said to be hairy and things like that, like a Yowie. Then there's another group called the Mindai, which are from Aboriginal religion that were dark spirits that were associated with snakes, and with, mythology surrounding serpents and snakes and dragon-like creatures and things is very big in an Indigenous Australian mythology. But the Victorian, especially the Mornington Peninsula sort of area where I'm from, the Indigenous people here were called the Bunurong, or are called the Bunurong. There are still representatives, but in part of their traditions was the Mindai, which I find a fascinating group that were kind of spirit that was associated with snakes and things like that, earthbound spirits and things like that. But yeah, there's lots of rich folklore and interesting stuff that's possibly related to Indigenous experiences in pre-settlement times of interactions with, ETs, what we might call ETs today, that have sort of penetrated into their folklore and superstitions and religions and things like that, which I find interesting to research.
Right. All right. Because we're getting into that direction eventually, because I know ahead of time what some of what you're going to say. But before we get deep into it, can you give me your origin story and what led you on the path that you are now? And please spare no details.
Yeah, cool. So I've been an experiencer of like what you might call high strangeness kind of phenomena all my life. Really early memories of waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to wake up family members, and seeing lights in the sky going outside, seeing tall, glowing, luminous beings leaping into the sky and levitating down, dark beings with glowing red eyes, small beings galloping around on all fours that at the time I thought were like puppets. They were like little puppets come to life. And since then, with all my research and my further experiences, I now understand what these things are and have context and stuff like that. But in these early days, didn't know what to make of all this kind of stuff. Some of it incredibly scary, being grabbed by them as well and thrown into what I thought was a sack or something at one stage. And they took off with me. And stopped at one stage and opened it again and stroked me and then closed it when it was too frightened. And then also, poltergeist-like activity. And one particular event that happened quite early on. So I was almost 5 years old. I would have been turning 5 in a month. Our family, it was traditional for us to go down to a local pine tree forest, like there's a golf course, and we used to jump the fence. My brothers and sisters and I jumped the fence and like lop off a branch on a tree of a pine tree and drag it home and put that in a bucket and say it was our Christmas tree. Each year we'd do that traditionally, and one year we went down. I saw behind a tree some kind of creature wrapping its hands, really long fingers, wrapping its hands around the side of the pine tree, looking at me with a long face, like what I thought was like a triangular shaped face, which I thought of as being mask-like at the time, big dark eyes. And I could see that its shoulders and arms looked like they were made out of the tree almost, like they were of the same texture as the bark on the pine trees. And it went behind the tree and back out the other side. And my brothers and sisters were off in the distance, and as they came back, they just walked straight past it as though they couldn't see it. And that really stoked the fire of passion for what I thought were fairies or elves. And I really got into, especially later on in my teenage years, the Celtic fairy faith and studying fairy lore and all that kind of stuff, because I thought I'd seen a fairy. That's how I interpreted it at the time. And as I got older, in my teenage years, I had more experiences with what I thought were elves or fairies. I had a really full-on experience when I was about 20. I'm 43 by the way. When I was about 20, I had a full-on experience where a friend and I used to go camping in the Dandenong Ranges, which are east of Melbourne, mountain range. Lots of big eucalypt forests there. But I decided to go on my own one time, and I had this experience where, I'd sort of been sent, because I was interested in fairy lore and things like that as well, and I decided as well that there was some kind of basis in reality there, because I'd seen them myself or seen something and I'd interpret. I was thinking these things, I think they are real. Not quite sure what they are, but so I was projecting thoughts while I was camping, especially on my own this time, that I wanted to have an interaction with them, but also that I sort of, in a way, wanted to offer my services to them as well. This is what I was doing, was part of the reason I was going. And I said, and I was interested in Wicca and Druidry and neo-paganism and things as well at the time.
Ryan, what gave you the impression that they were specifically at that place?
I just felt that if they were going to be anywhere, they were going to be there. I just had this feeling that the Dandenong Ranges, but Sherbrooke Forest National Park, I was thinking this mountainous region with these huge, mountain ash eucalypts. I think they're like the second biggest tree in the world after the redwoods, North American redwoods. They're certainly the biggest flowering plant in the world. They have these Eucalyptus regnum, a certain kind of eucalypt tree, gum tree, just get absolutely massive, up to 300 foot tall. So there's these forests blanketing the mountains there. And I thought, if they're anywhere, they're there, because it's supposed to be subterranean dwelling beings in mountains and things like that from Celtic lore. So when I was camping, then I had experiences that now I have the terminology to sort of say I was seeing orbs, I suppose you'd say. But at the time, I was just sort of thinking there's these lights in the trees, don't know what they are. When I was in the tent, I felt very sort of complacent. I felt like apathetic, like I wasn't having the strong emotional reactions you think you should be having in a situation like that, which I've come to understand later on is part of their mental manipulation and play, where they can actually suppress and downplay your critical faculties and your emotional responses and things like that, and have this sort of blanket of calming you down over you, which I think that was what was happening then. But then I could hear people running around the tent, touching the tent, hands on the tent, and then experience some missing time where suddenly it was morning. I was up there for a couple of nights. But the second day I heard, now this is another feature and it's a technological feature, but at the time I was sort of thinking of this as being quasi-spiritual or something like that. Although the boundaries between the dichotomy of spirituality and materialism sort of breaks down with the level of the technology we're talking about here, where you have technologies based on material, nuts and bolts technologies that are so advanced to us they appear as magic or spiritual, and it sort of gets a bit messy. But at the time, I didn't have this association as them being sort of related to UFOs or high technologies and things like that. I was sort of thinking of it more being a spiritual experience in some way. But they said to me with a powerful thought, like sort of a noiseless voice, like the kind of voice you'd have if you're reading silently to yourself, a silent reading voice kind of thing, but expressed much more quickly in a shorter space of time than you could actually speak it. Really quickly articulated sentences, like packets of information. And they said, "We will hold you to the bargain." That's what they expressed then. And then now that years later, when I moved back down to where I'd come from, the Mornington Peninsula was where I was born and grew up and things like that. But I spent years living away in the Dandenong Ranges and also in Melbourne in the city and things like this. But when I returned, then the experiences I was having, they took on a bit of a different turn. And they became more stereotypically ET UFO kind of related phenomena, what you'd associate with that sort of modern UFO lore. More, like clinical procedures, being levitated, taken up into craft over the top of, like out from our house over the under the roof of the porch and up into craft and things like that. With tall, thin people in medical gear, medical robes with really long fingers with devices, with their fingers, 4 long fingers that spread out and can oppose each other. So they're opposable. The fingers are opposable, and their thumbs, diminutive, vestigial, and further up their arm. And feeling around in my mouth, checking my teeth, and messing with the back of my head and putting something in the back of my head, which later I realized when I asked them, they said it was a transmitter, but intense pain pushing stuff up into the base of my skull and all this. So the sort of more like, and then I was like, okay, some very more sort of quintessential UFO kinds of phenomena. And while that was happening, they'd said to me in the more recent experiences, they said to me, will we hold you to that bargain? And that's when I made that association then between sort of alien, UFO, ET kind of close encounter stuff and fairy lore. Made that kind of bit of a connection in my head and thought, I think this is this continuity of experience on my life. It's explainable by the same kind of base reality, the same kind of primary cause, same race, of people, whatever. And that then stoked my fire to get interested in ufology, UFO research and things like that, which I hadn't had much of an interest in my life, a little bit of an interest, but nothing too extreme. I've sort of been interested in science fiction and things like that as in my teens and stuff like that, but not necessarily paying too much attention to what you could call ufology as a discipline. So basically, dude, that's sort of like an overview of what's been going on in the last 10 years or so. I've been having very, very intense experiences with these people, this particular race of people, which caused me to go looking for them, listening to the things they're telling me, their physical appearance, the kinds of technologies they use, the way they sound, the kinds of languages they speak, and seeking them in folklore and in other people's experiences. And then that's my first book, where I'm building a cryptoterrestrial profile, a CT profile, I call it, where I'm looking for these beings in traditions through time and other people's experiences and things like that, slowly building up a bigger picture and looking for them and trying to objectively demonstrate to people that they exist, beyond reasonable doubt, trying as hard as I can. Wow,
that's a lot to unpack. So let's unpack it. So you had said that this happened to you as a child, and that you had seen these beings do these weird things. You have missing time, right? So this is where I feel like I make the first connection. When I was a kid, I have a memory. I don't think it's a dream, but I have a memory of being a little kid. I know that I was staying in a room with my younger brother. I have a younger brother. He's about 4 years younger than me. So I must have been like 10. He was probably like around 5. And this memory is, I'm in my room. It's at nighttime. We're sleeping. And then I'm awakened by these beings that are floating in my room. But the thing is, I don't see who they really are. I believe they got into it sounds weird. They got into my mind and they projected to me something that I was more comfortable with. And that would be cartoon characters.
All right.
Specifically one, Captain Crunch was one, because I was a fan of the cereal or whatever. Now it sounds silly, but and I don't mean to drag this out, but when I was in the military, as you know, I told you I was at Nellis from 98 to 2002. And in the late 90s, Steven Spielberg did this miniseries called Taken. I don't know if you're aware of that show. It was a miniseries.
No, I don't think so.
If you get a chance, really watch that, because I believe if you watch that, you might have the same reaction that I did, because I connect with what was going on in that miniseries. But there's a scene in that miniseries where there's a child that's getting put to bed by his father. And once the father leaves and turns off the light, maybe a few moments later, there's a light projecting from inside of the kid's room. And it looks like the kid is aware of that light, or he recognizes what that light is. And this cartoon sort of character, I think it's either a squirrel or a rabbit, opens the window and beckons the child to come outside, right? And then the kid comes outside. He sees this tree that has a door, and the squirrel or whatever this animal is opens the door for him, and the kid walks through it. And then right as this animal's gonna go inside of the tree, he breaks the fourth wall and looks at the camera, winks, and then the tree turns into a UFO, and then it disappears. So that's an abduction scenario. Right. And the Taken series is about how aliens abduct generation through generations. So they'll pick a family and they'll abduct all the family members throughout the generations. So when I saw that scene, it really hit me hard. And it reminded me of when I was younger and had that incident when I was younger. And then I've also had incidents where I've gone to sleep in the bedroom and I woke up somewhere else and didn't know how I got there. But anyway, so that's my connection to this. But you said that you've had memories of them messing with the back of your head. Do you believe that they are implanted something back there? That you may have an implant back there?
Yeah, for a while I thought, I wasn't sure if it was that they were taking a sample from me of something, brain tissue even. It felt like it was going in far enough to be something like that. But then when I asked, they responded, presuming they're telling the truth as well, but they responded transmitter. So so that would be an implant, I suppose. But yeah, that's really interesting, dude, your experiences. I mean, in ufology these days, people say things like screen memories, where they're, like replacing memories and stuff like that. But in older folkloric tradition with the fairies, you'd call it casting a glamour or casting a glamour, taking on, like you were saying, the form of something the person's more comfortable with interacting with to facilitate a more positive interaction, calm the person down, and whatnot. Yeah, I think that's quite typical. Yeah, there's lots of people that talk about that kind of stuff, and that's part of their toolkit for the way they interact with us, for sure.
That's their MO, essentially.
Yeah.
Have you had the back of your head checked at all medically or X-rays just to see?
No, I haven't. I've never. No, there's other experiences where I feel like they're doing things to me as well. I don't, where they've like drilled into presumably a rib in my back, and then under one of my feet, and also in the top of my head. And I asked what that was about, and she said, for language and running. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, I am interested in linguistics, and I'm interested in trail running and things. And I was thinking, is that got anything to do with that? And then she said, it's a gift. Stop going on about it. And then I was thinking, okay. And then I wasn't quite sure what that even meant, because that can be ambiguous too. Like, she's presenting me with a gift, making an alteration to me in some way, or that she thinks that maybe I have some kind of ability that they covet, where they're like, oh, this guy's got he's got a facility with learning languages that we might be interested in studying or something. So there's still ambiguity there. But yeah. No, but I've never actually had I've never gone to medical professionals. Sorry to answer your question.
No, it's fine.
And been checked out or anything like that. I don't. I've never. I'm just not interested in doing that. I almost feel like it's. I almost feel like it'd be. What's the word I'm looking for? Not impolite.
Disrespectful.
Disrespectful. Yeah, that's the one, dude. Yeah, it feels now that may be them suggesting to me.
I got you.
Not to do it, and yeah, because they can suggest, of course, hypnotize, mesmerize, get inside your mind, make you have thoughts that aren't your own, but that you think are your own, and the idea that it's the same with taking photos and things like that. Like when my daughter and I witnessed together a golden triangle moving through the sky craft during the day with pink hues and things on it, that was oscillating in the sky and then shot out to be just a pinprick in the sky and then back down again. My daughter had her phone in her hand and she went to take a picture, and I said, no, don't take a picture. I could just feel this feeling like it was a suggestion almost to me that would not be appropriate. And then when just after that happened as well, the sides of my head started feeling really weird, and I was thinking, I hope I'm not having a stroke. What's going on here? It almost felt like someone was putting their hands gently on either side of my head. And so it felt really uncomfortable, and I was turning my head. So I put my hat back on, and then the feeling of the hat pushing against my head felt normal. And then after a few minutes, I took it off and the feeling was gone. Since then, I'm reading a lot of other people's experiences. I think maybe it had something to do with electromagnetism or something, like the craft itself, even though we couldn't see it anymore. Maybe it had even come down closer, but it had cloaked. And then I was feeling it on me, so this sort of effect. Maybe that's what that was. I'm not quite sure.
Right. A year and a half ago, my family and I witnessed a daytime sighting of a gold triangle that was oscillating here in Florida. And it just like the opacity of it like changed. It went from solid to just nothing.
Oh wow, cool.
Yes, fucking crazy, man. When you're saying things that connect to me a lot.
Yeah.
All right, so
cool.
this you mentioned the she. Like how do you know it's a she?
Okay, yeah. So the when they're communicating telepathically, sometimes the voice can be obviously feminine. Don't tell me how, because it's sort of noiseless, it's soundless, but it seems obviously feminine, sometimes obviously masculine, and sometimes neither in particular, just sort of neutral. But and in that particular occasion where I'd had the thing put in my head and foot, and I'd asked, and she'd said that, it's a gift, don't go on about it. There had been a woman who wasn't dressed in the medical gear and so she didn't have like the black lenses over her eyes and just had her normal huge blue eyes, whereas the medics have black eyes, like they're putting lenses or something, smart tech, presumably, I don't know. But she was there, she'd been sitting next to the bed, and then she walked around, and then she was standing, leaning against like a bench over on the other side of the room. And I felt that it was her that was doing this communication, and I could see her, and she was definitely a woman, female. But yeah, even if you can't see them, quite often you just get the vibe from the way of it, and I can't explain how, that it's a woman saying something or a man.
Right. Not to get into too much of the technology now, because I kind of want to cover that a little bit later, but you had mentioned something again that made a connection to, and that's, you said the dark black eyes, which could be some form of technology, and that connects to, I don't know if you're aware of Philip Corso. He wrote the day after Roswell. He talks about how when they got these beings, they peeled what was like essentially contacts almost. The dark eyes that everybody sees, they think that those are contacts, like a certain technology, and they got like some sort of like technology from that. I don't want to go too much into that, but that connects with that. But let's get back to your experiences. So you have brothers and sisters, I presume, siblings. Do they have any incidents themselves, or is it just you? Are you the only one that's having these things go on?
I have in the past. I have heard some of my siblings talking about having things happen, but I won't go into detail about that because they're not out of the closet necessarily about this kind of stuff, and I don't think it's as intense and dramatic as the stuff that's been happening to me, but who knows. But and my parents wouldn't mind me talking a little bit about their stuff, but they've had stuff happen to them over their lives as well, which sort of ties in again with what you were saying before about the intergenerational sort of cross-generational interest.
I was going to ask you if your daughter as well, if you don't mind, has your daughter said anything? Because my kids tell me things that they experience stuff.
Yeah, some of my kids, like one of my sons has said that he sees or has seen in the past white faces at the window, and a few other little bits and pieces, and also similar experiences to the ones you were saying, dude, about having experiences with characters, with characters from television or things like that might be, this sort of casting a glamour or screen memory kind of things. I haven't talked until more recently with them about my experiences. I'd opened up to my wife a fair few years ago now, but not my kids. Never talked about it in front of them or anything like that. More recently, in the past 2 years, I have, because I've written this book and I'm more sort of openly talking in the house about it. And I'm doing interviews and whatnot like this, and the kids know that I'm doing them and they know what it's about and things like that. But they were having experiences in the days before I'd be exposing them to these kinds of ideas as well. And yeah. So some of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too happy that my kids are starting to experience these things. I mean, they're older
Okay.
now, but they've been experiencing it when they were young, and they just opened up, let's say in the last year or so, about their experiences, which haven't been the same as mine. Like I've had a mixture of just basic instances, but some traumatic stuff like shadow people and
Right.
things. They haven't had that, which I'm kind of glad, but I still don't like the fact that they are experiencing that. And I don't like the fact that your kids have to experience that as well. But let's get into the CT, cryptoterrestrials. Where did that term come from? Let's get into that, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mac Tonys coined that term. Cryptoterrestrials means hidden earthlings. And Mac Tonys, rest in peace, passed away as a
Rest
very
in
young
peace.
man, 34
Yep.
years old in 2009. But he'd been formulating an idea, a hypothesis that it was an alternative to the dogmatic extraterrestrial hypothesis, or ETH, that most people basically consider to be like the standard default position of, if UFOs are real and if they are constructed and piloted by non-humans, therefore they are extraterrestrial, they're from somewhere else beyond the Earth. Usually as well extrasolar, from somewhere else beyond even the solar system. People normally consider that kind of thing. That's probably not as dogmatic as it used to be, but at the time, people are much more prepared to consider, the ideas of time travel, or the multiverse, and interdimensional possibilities behind the beings and all that kind of stuff now. But even just when Mac Tonys was thinking about this and composing some of his ideas, it was quite dogmatic. It was the mainstream opinion, and nothing else was really tolerated much. But he decided that it's this theme running through close contact phenomena today, that the beings, the non-humans, whatever they are, seem to be very interested in our genetics. And Mac Tonys was suggesting that this kind of interest implies that they have some genetic affiliation with us, that they are compatible in some way with us genetically, for them to be taking samples, for them to be, and then also in certain interactions, actually having sex, having intercourse, copulating with us, and things like that, which suggests very, very, very close genetic relationship, so close that they are us, or at least a sister race or something, and therefore indigenous to Earth. And so he said cryptoterrestrials, other races, or singular or plural. It was a hypothesis to him. He didn't necessarily believe it, but it was a thought experiment almost to Mac Tonys, floating this kind of idea as an alternative that better explained, in his opinion, some of the evidence, some of the elements, particularly the genetic interest. And he also, a large part of Mac Tonys' idea as well, this is where he kind of departs from Jacques Vallée, who'd written, that seminal piece, wonderful book, Passport to Magonia, and then he's written other books as well, of course, that are very much related to this kind of idea of characters from folklore, identified by him particularly, Celtic folklore, Gaelic folklore, that these beings represented in these older stories and older narratives and older interactions with non-human entities seem to have so many parallels with current UFO interactions, ET, UFOnaut or UFO pilot interactions when the people get to see them. Because Gaelic folklore about the fairies and things is about abductions, is about Nyan and Shi, the fairy lovers, interbreeding with mortals. It's about beings that are magical, can convince you of states of reality that aren't real, to manipulate your mind, cast glamories. They live in the earth. They are like a societal group of beings that live on the fringes of our world, that can manipulate us, can also be violent and threatening sometimes can offer help. If you graze your cattle too close to their underground dwellings, they can kill cattle, kill livestock. So you see these parallels with like cattle mutilations of today, say, associated with the ET phenomenon. But Jacques Vallée suggested that the beings or entities that he was identifying that were responsible for this kind of continuum, this, from old times till today, the fairies in the past, and now we'd call them aliens or ETs now. He was suggesting that they might be, or the evidence best suggests that they are somehow supernatural or metaphysical, superphysical in some way. The nuts and bolts understanding, flesh and bone understanding of them is inadequate or inappropriate. Whereas what Mac Tonnies did was take Jacques Vallée's ideas and said, hold on a second, if their technologies are advanced enough, surely they can hoodwink us. What if they are flesh and bone with nuts and bolts technologies, and they're here and they're in the earth, under the seas, in the mountains, and they're genetically impoverished and they require us to heal themselves or make themselves whole again, and they have this kind of clandestine presence, and perhaps a parasitic relationship, or perhaps symbiotic if there's sort of mutual benefit involved. So Mac Tonnies, that was really where Mac Tonnies, with his cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, departs from Jacques Vallée's, which is quite similar. And Mac Tonnies admitted, in his book, The Cryptoterrestrials, a meditation on indigenous humanoids and the aliens among us. Cool little book, not a very dense book, but there's a lot of good info in there. He admitted that he was building and standing on the shoulders of Jacques Vallée for the cryptoterrestrial idea, but then he brought it back to a sort of concrete reality. And so I felt that the beings that I interact with, that the term cryptoterrestrials from Tonnies was appropriate. You could argue that lots of different terms would work. And in the end, languages, like words for these kinds of beings, are just convention. And as long as everyone agrees on to use a term and to move on, that's fair enough. And there's a lot of, debates and arguments as to whether you should call them cryptoterrestrials, extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, or there's a whole host of other names. I've settled on cryptoterrestrial because I think in the end, it does stem from a concrete material kind of technology that is robust enough to make it so that they are, can be invisible, can move through solid objects by becoming intangible, can open portals, can do all these weird, wonderful, magical seeming things, but nonetheless, they're achieving it as people that are genetically related to us very closely and are just as physical as we are. No more magical or spiritual or esoteric or anything than we are really in the end,
So they're like us, but they just have a heads up because they have better technology, essentially.
Yeah.
So to touch a little bit more on Mac Tonnies, because he's a very interesting character, and the reason why I say that is because when I was doing like research for this interview, and his name had come up, I had noticed that he was originally like a fictional writer dealing with like sci-fi and transhumanism, and that's what most of his books were. And then out of the blue, before he passes away, he comes out with this nonfiction book about these crypto-terrestrials, which you say he builds off of Jacques Vallée's research. Do you know, like, is that the reason why he did this one book before he passed away? Is to piggyback essentially?
I think he did write fiction, and I think he had a book published that was a collection of short stories called something like Fade to Black or something.
Yeah.
But he also was intensely interested in Mars, and he wrote another book called, it escapes me now. Before the Cryptoterrestrials was released and before Mac passed away, he actually wrote a book about the features on Mars, on the Martian surface, and the implications of that, and what it might say about some ancient civilization that was there before, and what we could learn from such a civilization were it to turn out that they are these structures were built by some extinct civilization. So he was dipping his toe into sort of that kind of research, alternative science research and things like that, investigations and philosophizing, I suppose, and speculating about these things. And then he was well known, I think, for his blog, which still exists. It's still up online, and he formulated a lot of his ideas about cryptoterrestrials slowly over that, I think, and then decided he was going to write a book about it. And he was considered, I think he considered himself to be a futurist, where he was speculating about the possible future of humanity. And transhumanism, posthumanism. Some of his blogs have been some of his blog entries have been edited and published, as well as Posthuman Blues, volumes 1 and 2. So I've got them as well somewhere or other, but I've never gotten to the end of them. I have to get back and try to get some time to read them at some stage. But and he wrote a lot of interesting kind of political commentary and things like that in his blogs as well. But he'll always be remembered for his cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, I think, in particular. And he's just such an intelligent guy, you know. I mean, you can listen to him still. Some of his interviews and things that he'd done on podcasts and radio and stuff like that about his Martian book, The Martian Apocalypse, I think that book was called. And then also his cryptoterrestrial stuff. Just such an eloquent speaker, such an intelligent guy. If he'd gone on to be fortunate enough to have had a longer life, he would have, I'm sure, produced a lot of really interesting material and work. Rest in peace.
Yeah, he was on Coast to Coast a few times, if I remember correctly.
Right.
But you had made some comments about like these creatures being somewhat parasitic and also copulating with humans, and that connects with like the Nephilim, and Archons. So those could be like other names that maybe these beings were given, right? But do they have a definitive name, Ryan? Like, because I know you mentioned them a specific name. Can you get into that? Like their name?
Yeah. They said, and the idea of, in Gnosticism, the idea of the Archons as being the servants of the demiurge and the manufacturers, artisans of this reality, and it's sort of like a prison planet and all that kind of stuff. There's some aspects of that, I think, that are relevant to these beings. I think I'm quite boring when I say this, and people are just like, "Oh, he's saying everything is these guys," But I think that if not all, then most supernatural characters and figures from our superstitions and our mythologies and our religions are in some way traceable back to them, and then as cultural interpretations of their real presence, filtering into our beliefs and our thoughts. And they said to me that they're called the Majana, and I chose to spell that Majeena. Could have spelled it differently. It could have been Majina. I don't know. Just at the time, right. I thought I'll just write it like that, and I've started writing it like that, and now I can't be bothered changing it. Sometimes I think maybe I should have spelled it with an I instead of a double E, but whatever. And they've said that to me a few times, and I've settled for that word, and I use that more often nowadays than I would call them anything else. When I was writing my first book, even though they'd mentioned that name to me a few times, I didn't really use it in the first book, preferring to call them, just CTs, cryptoterrestrials, or Orions, as in the constellation of Orion. And in the book, the investigations try to demonstrate that they have this relationship with Orion's belt. And so it's, and also
P-52 Orions.
Also, a designation that Majestic has used for them in the past is P-52 Orion, which is,
you know what that means?
Present plus 52,000 years from now, which is because the Majestic believed them to be future humans, which they are in a way. But it depends on what you mean by time travel, because they're not really, it's not like a time stream and they're from our future. It's more like a Rick and Morty kind of interdimensional, multiverse kind of thing.
Right? Like a multiverse.
Multiverse. In order to, with their genetic impoverishments, from too much genetic engineering and interfering with their own DNA over millennia, means that they have reproductive issues now, and they are unraveling, and they require our DNA to augment and bolster and return wholeness to them. So they've sidestepped into another timeline that is, for all intents and purposes, identical to the way theirs was, their ancient history, and moved into that. So hijacked, I mean, that's a sort of a fairly negative word, but an emotive word. It depends on how kind you want to be to them. But really, you could say that they've hijacked our reality because they see us as being ancient, healthy versions of themselves before the fall, in the sense of before they ruined their own genome. And this is an ongoing problem, pathologies and maladies that they can't permanently fix. So they require a generational, across transgenerational access to our DNA with all of their new generations. So, and then people could suggest, hold on a sec, if you're saying they're cryptoterrestrials, they're indigenous to Earth, but you're saying they're not from here because they're from another dimension. That's a fair point. They are from another version of Earth originally, albeit in their version of Earth, this gets quite complicated. In their version of their timeline, they eventually left Earth and went to Orion. So that's why you could call them Orions. And that's why Majestic has designated them Orions. And also considers them to be future humans of a kind. But you could just as easily argue that they are interdimensionals or creatures of the multiverse, which is what Jacques Vallée at one stage had suggested they might be as well. Yeah.
So do you feel like they left here because they fucked up? They left here to go to Orion because maybe there was something in Orion that they thought may have been able to help them, and they realized, okay, it's not, we're not doing anything better here in Orion. Let's go back to Earth. Is that how it works? Is that how that's what it seems
overall,
like?
I'm not quite sure whether their genetic problems, whether they had their genetic problems as early as that, as before they'd left their version of Earth. They left Earth to the moon and then to Mars, and then over thousands and thousands of years, then ended up finding an Earth-like planet orbiting on the Lam in Orion, and went there and were there for tens of thousands of years. So they're considered to be 52,000 years ahead of us, potentially, and then returned. But I think that their genetic problems were developing slowly over a very long period of time. And that originally left a version, excuse me, co-coughing.
It's all right.
Great minds think alike. I think they left. They left Earth because there were issues with Earth as well, where there'd been solar activity in their version of Earth that had caused upheavals and pole shift, and over thousands of years they'd built up their technologies again because they'd been smacked down by the cataclysms to be, pre-industrial kinds of people, and then they slowly over millennia built up technologies again and then left Earth. If people are interested in looking more into that kind of things, there's a guy called Dan Burish. He hasn't been very popular in ufology for a long time, but people are taking more seriously his testimony. Again, he claimed to have been a microbiologist employed at S4, where Bob Lazar claims to have worked on back engineering.
Yeah. And he took hits. He took a lot of hits.
He did, yes. And then was told not to talk anymore and didn't, and hasn't really had that much to do. Hasn't, I think, for a very long time now, done any like formal presentations or anything like that, maybe since like 2010 or something. But still very much alive and well. And in the background there somewhere. But Dan Burish, Burisch. If people are interested in looking him up, find out a lot of cool information. I definitely believe that guy. All the things that he says compatible with the information I've been told by these guys, the beings themselves, and it all adds up. Like his cosmology, his understandings of how many beings there are, their backstories, why they're here, and all this kind of stuff. The physical descriptions of the beings that he gives is identical to what the beings have told me about themselves. And so when I discovered Dan Burish, I was like, this dude's the real deal.
Right.
But you know, his paper trail doesn't make sense. But a lot of people involved in this kind of world that are coming out and making claims. Often, if you're doing some kind of normal journalistic investigation into the truth of the matter, there's counterintelligence. Matters of national security are always going to have this kind of thing. But I think particularly when it comes to the UFO question, you can't just keep it at that. You know, Bob Lazar had heaps of problems as well, where I think Stanton Friedman in particular, the famous ufologist Stanton Friedman, really gave Bob Lazar a hard time.
Yeah, he didn't like
Bob Lazar's paper trail just did not make sense. You know, none of the institutions he claimed to have attended or workplaces and stuff said they knew him and all this kind of stuff. The same thing with Dan Burish. But you can't leave the investigation at that, because that's really to be expected. If they're telling the truth, you could argue that if their paper trail makes too much sense, you could flip it on its head. If they're making all of these grandiose claims, and their paper trail makes a fair bit of sense there over their lives, you could say, "Oh, that's interesting. Why haven't powers that be done more to muddy the waters there?" Now, Charles Hall, and I know, dude, I'd love to hear about your experiences as well at Nallas, because you said you were even at Creech. Yeah,
yes.
Is that which is where which was Charles Hall's books is Indian Springs. Yeah, at that time. But he was like Dan. When I discovered Charles Hall, that was like when I discovered Dan Burish as well. I discovered him earlier than Dan. I discovered Dan Burish, but I was like reading those books and I was like, this is definitely real, and these are the same beings that I have interactions with. So the beings that Charles Hall calls tall whites, and he coined that word. I'm pretty sure in ufology, I might be wrong. There might be, a precedent to that. Where other people were using the term tall white before him. You know, George, did he say tall whites? I don't think he used that term. Though.
He didn't say. I don't know if he specifically said tall whites, but tall whites are always associated with Nordics, and I know Adamski.
Yeah, Nordics. I think before Charles Hall, people would just call them Nordics.
Right.
But now tall whites, I'm pretty sure, post Charles Hall. So his books came out. His first two, I think, came out in 2002.
Right. That's how I know of tall whites through Charles Hall. That's how I know.
Charles Hall, yeah.
Yes.
Nowadays, sometimes people now make a distinction between tall whites and Nordics and say that names for two different races and things. I think that's an artificial distinction. I think, like you listen to old school dudes like that are sort of like been interested in ufology from before Charles Hall's days, and they're more likely to use the word Nordic and didn't seem to have tall white in their vocabulary. I think there are some instances maybe of people saying tall blondes and things like that. But anyway, getting sidetracked there. But the tall whites, what he called tall whites, posted to Nallas for 2 years in the 60s as a weather observer, and he claimed to have prolonged and regular interactions with tall, fair beings. Well, not all tall. Some of them are quite small, and that's an element of his testimony as well, which is true, that these beings can take a very long time to grow, and it can take 100 years to even get to 6 foot tall. They have like windows of growth, and if they're fortunate enough to reach the advanced stages of like 600-700 years and things like that, they can be immensely tall, 8-9 foot tall, or even more. I think Charles Hall mentions one individual is 10 foot tall. Large blue eyes, frail build, living in the mountain ranges there, advanced technologies, luminous suits, would play tricks on him, would mess with his mind and use mental manipulation, suppress memories that he would try to do a bit of self-hypnosis with and try to, locate some of these, retrieve some of these lost memories and things like that. But his books, Millennial Hospitality books, I recommend people, any viewers, your listeners, if they haven't read them yet, I really recommend reading them. And that's definitely the real deal. But what would you say, dude, you having been posted to the same place yourself, what do you think of Charles Hall's testimony?
Okay, so when I was there, I wasn't aware that Indian Springs was the launching ground for UAVs, drones.
Okay.
And so a lot of the drones that they were testing were confused for UFOs sometimes. Okay, so
Okay.
I worked at Nellis. I worked in what they call a weapon storage area in a place called Area 2. Okay, it was called Area 2, and it was what people don't know is that the Nellis testing range, which is Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51, S4, Indian Spring, it's all connected. It's all one thing. Okay. And you get jobs through word of mouth, essentially, from what I understand, from what I heard, to work at specific special areas. I worked with people that worked at Area 51. I just wasn't allowed to ask them questions about it. I did one time, and the response I got back wasn't a positive response back. It was essentially like, don't ever ask me that question again, you know? So I worked as what they call a sentry, SENTRI, which is a guard. I was a guard initially when I started, and I worked at the weapon storage area, and we had nukes there. So, and that's not like a secret now that we had nukes. And then from there, I had my first experience, like not even a couple of months in, where it was me and it wasn't by myself. It was me and three other airmen. We saw a series of lights in a triangular pattern and some sort of mass blocking out the stars, because this was like in the evening, and in the desert it gets dark really, really quickly. So they did like some sort of like, I don't know how serious of an investigation they did, but they did an investigation. They had all of us separated, tell our stories. We wrote a memo down, or what would you call it? It's not a memo, but we wrote a statement. We had to write a statement. After that, I don't know what happened. We were told it never happened. We told it never happened, and I don't know what happened to our statements. We were told never to talk to each other about it. So me and the three other individuals, we weren't allowed to even discuss it. What was weird about it is I would be working with these individuals in the coming months or years and never had the thought to want to bring it up to them out of fear. They never brought it up to me. There were instances where we could have talked about it and nobody would have ever known. We just never did, which is weird, you know?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So from there, I went into the armory, still at the weapon storage area. So I got essentially promoted, I guess, and I started working in the armory. We had instances there, like shadow people, and I mean people. I'm talking people, not one shadow person, but a multitude of shadow people running around in the desert in the weapon storage area, which caused, it caused like major hoopla. Like, and this was at nighttime. And that's documented. There's stories out there. If you look it up, you'll find that there's stories out there of people talking about this incident. So that's one. There's other incidents of, people seeing like me and the three other individuals, lights out there, seeing what could be a satellite moving, but then the satellite, quote unquote, stops and goes in a completely different direction, which satellites don't do. And that's again over the Nellis testing range. So Indian Springs, where Indian Springs comes in, every once in a while they would have security forces members, which I was, do other jobs. So if a plane, let's say they were testing a plane and it crashed, they would send troops out there to guard the plane so that nobody goes out there and messes with the plane or anything like that. Or if like Indian Springs was short manned and they didn't have anybody to watch the gates, the entry and exit of Indian Springs, they would pull security forces members from Nellis. So twice I had to do that. The first time I was with a partner and nothing happened. But let me tell you, Indian Springs is a very weird place. Okay.
Right.
And what I mean is you see cars in the parking lot, but you don't see people getting in them and leaving and coming in. Like the traffic is so minimal. It's almost like a ghost town. And that's in all times of the day and night. The highway that connects to Indian Springs, same thing, not a lot of traffic. The drive from Nellis to Indian Springs, although it should seem short, for whatever reason, it's pretty long. I don't know if it's because I couldn't drive out there on my own, and neither could my partner. Right? They would drive us out there. So I don't know if they
Okay.
took a longer paths that we couldn't memorize the route there,
Ah,
because it just
right.
seemed like it was just too long. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
the second time that I was there, um, I was supposed to be with a partner. Supposedly he had called in sick, and they told me that they needed somebody out there. So they were like, "Bring a lunch with you. You're gonna be in this gate shack, which is one of the gate, the main gate shack for the main gate, and then we'll come and pick you up like around 5, 6 o'clock p.m." So I started my shift probably like at 7 in the morning, and then I was supposed to end my shift like around 5. So it's around quarter till 5 o'clock. It's starting to get dark because, like I said, out in the desert, it gets dark pretty quickly. And I call up to check to see if somebody is en route to pick me up, and they told me that they had to take care of something on the flight line, and that they were going to be late just to hang out. So I wound up hanging out, and then I got bored after a while. So I leave the gate shack and I walk, and the gate shack is not far from the main road, but I walk out towards the main road just to get air. And for some reason, something tells me to look behind me, and because you have Indian Springs, it's in a valley, as you know, and then there's mountainsides, right, that connect to Indian Springs. And on the mountainside, I see this red orb,
Oh
like
wow. Yeah.
floating. It shoots a laser into the side of the mountain. It melts the mountain to the point where you can see the lava, so to speak, or the magma,
Oh
and
wow.
and drippage. Then the heat subsides, and then this ball just disappears. Okay. So
Far
then,
out.
like maybe 20, 30 minutes later, I get picked up. And on my drive home, I knew in my mind not to say a damn word to these people, because I did it before and I was told it never happened. And I didn't want to have that attention drawn on me again. So that's
Yeah,
my
fair enough.
story about Indian Springs.
Yeah, wow. That's very, very cool. That's intriguing, dude. Wow. Shit. Yeah. I don't Will you mind if I put a bit about that in my next book? What do
Yeah.
you
No,
That's
you're
okay.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, cool, man. It's very intriguing. And the shadow people link as well is especially intriguing to me as well because
Well,
I've seen. Oh, sorry,
have you
yeah.
heard of Catman?
No, what's that? What?
It sounds extremely stupid, but there's this sort of lore
Yeah.
about this creature, this hybrid creature. Um, I gotta send you because I got interviewed by this individual named Tony Merkel. He has a podcast called The Confessionals. Um, well, let me tell you. First, the first time that I ever reached out to anybody, because I don't really talk about this all the time, and I wasn't talking about this for many years. I just started talking about this like maybe
Yeah. Cool.
2, 3 years ago, like in videos and in interviews. My first interview is with Robert Hastings. I don't know if you know who Robert Hastings is. Okay,
No.
so Robert Hastings is one of the first individuals to do research on military and the connections with UFOs. Okay,
Okay.
um, he also was one of the first individuals with a large group of people to go to Congress with this, and this happened like in the 90s. Okay, so you're talking about Stanton Friedman. It was him, Stanton Friedman, Robert Salas. I don't know if you know who Robert Salas is.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Robert Salas was he wasn't an officer, I don't believe. I think he was like a high ranking NCO in Maelstrom Air Force Base, and they had that incident where the nukes got shut down by the UFO.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so he was involved in that.
Yeah.
There's the Japanese incident, the Japanese airline
Oh
incident.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
guy who handled the radar went to this meeting as
Okay, yeah.
well. It was featured on Larry King. So anyway, Hastings is a big deal. He's not some run of the mill guy. And
Okay, cool, yeah.
he was on Coast to Coast, and I was listening to it, and he had asked at the end of the show if anybody that was in the military had experiences and they're willing to come out and talk about them. He was like, please email me, but the caveat is you have to send me a copy of your DD Form 214 to show proof that you were in the military and that you were stationed at wherever you were stationed at. So that's
Yeah,
how
cool,
he
cool.
would be able to weed out the people who were telling the truth, the people who were lying. So I
Yeah.
reached out to him and we developed a friendship. So he wrote an article, say in 2014, about my incident. and I could send that to you if you want.
Oh yeah, that'd be wonderful, man.
There's a lot of information that you can probably get out of that, but I'll send that to you.
Sweet.
And then, like I said, I didn't really talk about it too much other than stay in contact with him until I did the interview with Tony Merkel. And then there I talk about this thing called Catman, which I found out was like this supposed genetic hybrid program where they took supposedly DNA and they manipulated it. The DNA varies because if you listen to someone like Emery Smith, he'll tell you that it's alien DNA mixed with animal DNA or some other DNA like ours or whatever to create this hybrid whatever creature.
Okay.
I was told that it was 2 different animal DNA that were mixed together to create a weapon, and that they were doing these experiments out near Area 51 and that the creature had escaped. Okay, so, and again, sounds crazy, but there's an individual named Chuck Zukowski, okay? He had a show that didn't last that long. I think they forced him to shut down because he was getting kind of close. But in one of his shows, he goes out to the Nellis area because he found out a story about some creature that's out in the desert, okay? And I believe that is what they call Catman. Now, other than myself and the person who told me the story about Catman, I haven't really heard about anybody talk about it until recently on a Sasquatch podcast. There was an individual who would not say where he worked at in the Las Vegas area. It wasn't Nellis, and I believe it was Indian Springs, but he said he wasn't allowed to talk about it, and he talked about Catman.
Right.
So,
okay.
So there's some crazy shit going on, Ryan. I'm just gonna tell you straight up now. There's some crazy fucking shit going on, and I ain't lying. Goddamn it, you know?
Yeah.
Because I don't know these people. I don't know any of them.
Right.
I didn't. These people are talking about how they served or how they worked years after I was out of Vegas. So I don't know who these people are. I have no connection to them other than the stories that they've told. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't mean to go on a tangent there. I apologize.
That's good stuff, man. Yeah. So Nellis in general, but particularly Indian Springs is it like other people? I think, who was it? Hold on, I can't remember her name now. She's a journalist that her name's escaping me. A famous journalist that is a ufologist. She recently co-wrote a book with Jacques Vallée. Anyway, doesn't matter.
I think I know who you're talking about. She's connected to Philip Corso, and I think I know who you're talking about.
Anyway, that doesn't matter. But
I know who you're talking about.
She organized when Charles Hall's testimony was first out, and he'd written his first couple of books, and he was doing interviews and stuff like that. She interviewed him, and she decided to hire a private investigator to go and find some of the people, some of the airmen that he alleged were there with him, because his FOIA requests, numerous people have tried to access his details and details about his enlistment, all that kind of stuff, and it draws a blank when people are doing freedom of information requests. But she had, and I just can't remember her name, and it's really annoying me, set up a private investigator quite early on there in the early 2000s to go and find some of these guys. And he did. And I think Michael Sala, ufologist Michael Sala, wrote up a report about it, and I actually put it in the back of my book as one in the appendixes. But he found them. Unfortunately, he didn't give their names because of their anonymity and whatnot. They didn't necessarily directly want to be involved with this, but he discovered people who said, yeah, Charles Halls was there, which corroborates there a big part of his story, because lots of people knocked down Charles Hall's story off the bat because, hey, he wasn't even enlisted at the time he said he was. There's no record of him, blah, blah, blah. So they confirmed, I think there were 3 airmen that they tracked down that said, yeah, we knew Charlie Hall, and confirmed that. And they confirmed things as well about the place being an area of high strangeness, things being moved around as well when they're posted, and having all of these interesting experiences. And I think they also confirmed the idea of UFOs being very prevalent out there, and the general culture was to not talk about it. Or, you'll have this legacy following you, or you'll be having to pay for it in some kind of way. Your career, in way of your career, and all that kind of stuff. But so that's very interesting that seems to corroborate, that he was there, which is very unfortunate, that the powers that be, whoever, if they've messed with his record, to muddy the waters or whatever, because so many people that would find his book so compelling and so interesting never even bother to get to the stage where they're going to consider the reality of it, because officially he wasn't even there in the first place. So it's really sad, But anyway, hopefully more people will discover Charles Hall as time goes on.
Yeah, it's eventually, it's going to be inevitable. It's going to be inevitable. But also another thing I wanted to tell you too is, like, when I first got to Nellis, okay, one, I was a fan of the UFO subject before that, watching UFO files and stuff on History Channel.
Yeah.
And I went through, my basic training and my tech school, and then usually after that, once you're done, they send you to your duty station. But something happened where it took them a while to find me a duty station, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were just haphazardly sending troops anywhere, but they weren't considering that some of those troops had families, and it was causing morale to go down, and people weren't re-enlisting, or they were telling other, their friends, don't enlist, they're going to send you here and there. So they had to find, I guess, a duty station for me to go to that I could bring my family, because I already had a family in place. And then I got Nellis, and I didn't realize I'm driving to Vegas, where Area 51 is. We're near Roswell. Like, that never occurred to me until after my first incident there,
Okay. Yeah.
But when I got there, they show you around, and I talk about, like, the area, in the interview. I'm going to send you the interview I did. I go into detail about how the area looks, because that area is no longer inhabited anymore. They took the nukes out. They got rid of the guards, and it's pretty much you can go there if you wanted to and drive right into Area 2, the weapon storage area. It's been emptied out, but they still have the above ground silos where they had the nukes stored into, right? And I remember this tech sergeant taking me to one of these silos, and the silos had like a metal door, all of them did, that had these claw marks on it.
Oh, wow.
These 3-fingered claw marks on it. And he like, it was there before he got there, but it was part of the lore there. Like, it was like an attraction, I guess. You show the people that you bring in, like the newbies, the different parts of the weapon storage area. But I remember seeing that claw mark in the metal, like whatever this was clawed the metal,
All right. Okay.
And I know you talk about the technology of these creatures, but before we get into I kind of wanted to ask you a question before I went on my tangent, which I apologize again. The Magina or Magina, does that stand for something? Does it translate into anything?
Yeah, well, it's related to, now I'm not quite sure if it was their name for their planet that was orbiting Al-Nalam, or if it's the name for Al-Nalam's star itself, is Mana, they said. Now, and there's another race as well called Sebetiana, and they are from Sebet, but I'm not quite sure again if that's the name of a planet or a system. And Madjana, or I think Mandjana with a bit of an N as well. I've been trying to get a proper pronunciation and asking them if I'm doing it right and all that kind of stuff. And they say I am, but although it's close enough. But it's related to them being people of the place. And yeah, so there's Mana and Sebet. So Sebetjana are the small brown ones. The Virginia incident in Brazil is an example of them. They kind of look like greys, but they're dark brown with ridges, more prominent ridges on their skulls. Right. And then they also have a suit, like their version of a boa suit, their version of these cloaking suits and whatnot, but theirs has like a large head with ears, kind of, and sort of is furry. So they're not furry, but their suits are, and they're like the Hopkinsville goblins, the
Kentucky, right?
Kentucky goblins, the Kentucky, yeah, is typical of their appearance, and you can find them in different cases in the literature and stuff, that presenting themselves like that, but wearing these suits. But what they look like under the suits is the Virginia incident kinds of beings. They're from Sebet, and the Mudgina call them Sebetina, but I don't know what they call themselves. That's just what, right. And they call them as well little brothers, and they're close allies with them, these two groups. So the ones that are like tall whites, Mudgina or Mungina, and Sebetina. Yeah.
And so the Sebetina, they look different than the Mudgina?
Yeah, they're the little brown ones, the Virginia incident beings. Like,
yeah.
Or when they're in their outfits, their helmets look like a vampire bat's head, kind of, but that's a helmet. Yeah, like the Kentucky goblins.
I think James Fox is doing research on that. He's about to, like, I guess, release a documentary about the Virginia incident, if I'm not mistaken.
That'll be cool to watch.
Because I mean, I heard that incident again, like before I even joined the military. They were talking about that incident, but not in depth like they are now. I think there's more information being released now. But can you explain the term free range archaic beings or free range ancient humans?
Well, that's what we are to them, and free range in the sense that they've been present for thousands of years throughout history, as cryptoterrestrials, as hidden people in the earth, dipping into the pool of our genetics to bolster their own genetics. So in the sense, I sort of think of us as being free range because they usually don't interfere with us that much, or our natural evolution or progress, but so as to not artificially corrupt us in any way, really, but can access our genes when they require to. So in that sense, we're like free range archaic humans, in that we're archaic versions of them. So that's sort of how they see us, as archaic humans.
Right. So we're like easy pickings for them.
And sort of and kept in a sense, like and this is sort of, I think a lot of people think of this as being sort of fairly condescending or a patronizing view that they have of us. But and one of the reasons perhaps why disclosure hasn't happened earlier than it has, because the idea that they're not ETs really necessarily, but they're CTs, and they're here and they have been here for thousands of years, and they hoodwink us and manipulate our minds, and can and do intrude in our reality, but on their own terms, and are using us, really. I mean, it's not as parasitic as all that. I suggest that it's more symbiotic. It's a two-way thing, in the sense that they are very concerned about our survival, and you could look at that as being a selfish thing, but they require us to be uncorrupted as we are and survive. Otherwise, they will perish, and I don't know how many generations without access to our DNA that they would end up dying out, but they do require us. And so, lots of people, they wouldn't be happy with the idea of that. In fact, a few different people that I've talked to that have, find what I have to say compelling enough that they're prepared to entertain the idea that it's a possibility. They say, how do I unlearn that? They say to me, I don't want to know. If that's what's happening, I don't really want to know. Right. And they thought they wanted to know. They say, we want disclosure, And I present them all the information and evidence I have, and they're like, oh no, let's leave it undisclosed then, shall we? So some people find it, incredibly creepy and manipulative, and take the real negative slant on it, which is understandable. I myself just find it so incredibly intriguing. It's just I'm just so fascinated, and I'm just also so honored to be a part of it and to be interacting with them and things like that. That's the side I take. But then again, they may be telling me to feel that way.
Right. Yeah.
manipulate or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, you like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you love it, dude. You
Yeah.
know, yeah.
These are not the drones you're looking for.
Yeah. But yeah, there it is.
Yeah, there's some, I guess I don't know if you can call it a correlation, but what we've been doing to ourselves for years, like our body modifications, plastic surgery. And I don't know if you're a fan of sports, but like, how athletes are now breaking down because they're taking these performance
Oh, right,
enhancing
yeah.
drugs and all this stuff. I'm wondering if that's what they're warning us not to do. That's what, if that's
Yeah, I
what's
think so.
worrying them, because that all the things that we're doing now with this body modifications and all that's going to lead eventually to worse things, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's that's sort of fairly superficial stuff for body modifications and stuff like that. But when we start getting down into the DNA and altering code and things like that, which people are really wanting to get on board with these days, and geneticists manipulating us and making us something different, rather than just augmenting someone by giving them fake boobs or whatever, actually, messing with their DNA so that the next generation have naturally larger boobs and things like this. Like, as soon as you're really making these intricate changes and stuff like that, that is a bad thing from the perspective of the CTs, because they're the kinds of lines they went down, and the whole purpose of us to them is that we're not like that. But we're also being corrupted genetically and stuff because of all of the waste products and all the plastics and stuff that are in the environment, that are in our food and in the air and in the water, and are messing with us. And so the health of the biosphere and the encouragement of biodiversity on the planet, across the face of the planet, and the utilization of green technologies and sustainable technologies and sustainable agricultural systems and all this kind of stuff that have as little impact on the earth as possible, really need to be put in place. And these beings are all for that kind of thing, because in the end as well, they need us to be healthy, and healthy humans. Healthy earth is healthy human, because and I liken it to the idea of, like the metaphor of, if you've got a plant and you want its leaves to be healthy, just spraying a little bit of water on the surface of the leaves and keeping them shiny but not watering the roots is not going to help. You need to have shiny leaves or shiny people as the systemic, holistic system of the earth is in place. You need to water the roots. You need a healthy earth, and then naturally, organically, humankind will be more healthy, and we won't have all of these petrochemicals and whatnot, and plastics and invading our bodies and all this, and also won't require genetic manipulation, because we will naturally be much more inclined to live longer, happier lives and be stronger and healthier and all that kind of stuff, if the biosphere is in good shape. So I need to sort of start thinking in those sort of systemic ways about how to maintain our health by taking care of our planet, which sounds like, it's very sort of new age, hippy dippy kind of stuff. And it is a little bit embarrassing to espouse these kinds of things, but these are the ideas that they represent, that they do have about the future of the earth. And you can, and again, if people are suspicious of these races of beings and consider them to be manipulative and of being hoodwinking us for so long that they're not trustworthy and things like that, I think in the end, if they are for the health of our planet and the health of us, that sounds fair enough to me.
Yeah, you can't blame them.
No, if they have an alternative agenda that they're not revealing to us or something like that, well, I'm not sure what that would be, but what they are suggesting and espousing sounds, fairly positive to me, and I'm on board with it.
Awesome, man. So let's get into their technology, because you had talked about suits.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so tell me what's their technology? What do they have? What do they contain?
Yeah. So you're going to have video to this, aren't you?
Yes.
Oh, if I hold this up, yeah, I'll just hold up my book anyway. So the cover of my book has what I call a boa suit on it.
And how do you spell that?
I spell it BOAS, and I got the word from the Antonio Villas-Boas case from Brazil. And he in 1957 was working on a tractor at night, working on a farm, working at night to escape the heat of the day, saw a red craft. He thought it was a star approaching, landed. Dudes got out of it in dark suits. They were fairly short. They were 5 foot tall. So fairly short, tall whites. But nonetheless, as Charles Hall talked about in his books, and I've talked about a fair bit before, they take a very long time to grow. So if these mudgeonah are 5 foot tall, they're probably going to be something like 50 to 60 years old or something like that. So still mature in certain ways, with the capacity to live 10 times that age if they're lucky or whatever, but and at the beginning of their lives, but still, not kids. They were wearing these dark suits, and they are a version I've identified of the same kind of suits that I have seen. A few little differences here and there. Think of them as being like a version of the same suit that, Chris Bledsoe has talked about. Charles Hall himself talks about in his 5th book. And I talk in my book about how Charles Hall saw these suits, but he presumed them to be a different kind of alien wearing them. But I argue I have lots of reasons to feel and argue and suggest that in his 5th book called The Greys, where he talks about how he saw tall greys, he was seeing tall whites, but wearing these different suits. The military grade suits can cloak, levitate. Super soldier suits increase their strength, stamina, and they can become intangible. These are the shadow people when they're cloaking. That's, in my opinion, if not all beings witnessed that are considered shadow people, are them, at least most, especially if you have shadow people in your house, especially if it's in tandem with UFO activity where you've seen UFOs and things like that. It's them. It's definitely them. So sometimes they still cast shadows when they're cloaking, or sometimes they'll appear as a sort of dark, nebulous figure. They can pass through walls and whatnot. But glowing red eyes at night, these like a dull glow, like dull red coals when you see them. They have a long, like, nose appendage that flares out. It's for reverberating, what's the word I'm looking for? Amplifying sounds. And a mouthpiece as well to filter the air, like a filter, a breathing apparatus, but to filter the air because they're susceptible to allergies and whatnot, and bacteria getting in their lungs and things. They have weaker immune systems than us. But now these, and then also prosthetic claws that they wear on their hands, which they use for self-defense usually.
How long are these claws?
It's not uncommon. A couple of inches. It's not uncommon for dogs, if they are in the vicinity, for dogs to, either disappear or be found with their throats slashed. Even John Keel talked about the parallel between UFO flaps and dogs being found with their throats slit. This is them. Even Chris Bledsoe had one of his dog's throats slit, but then it was healed. They're not fans of dogs, and I think it's if they're injured, that they're stuffed as well. Like, they take a long time to heal. If they're much more easily can be killed, can succumb to disease, and also they take a long time to heal.
Do you think it's because the dogs sense that, like, the dogs have a sense for them?
That as well, I think. That as well, I think. Yeah, for sure. I think, they're just like, dogs have preternatural senses compared to us, and when they prefer not to be noticed, and they're doing a good job of, being clandestine for Homo sapiens, the pesky dog in the yard will be barking and things like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And there's sort of there's contradictions as well in the way they see the world. And I understand if people think, they're callous enough to be killing dogs, but at the same time, they're vegans, plant-based diets that refuse to wear clothes that are made out of animal products. Has to be synthetic or plant-based material. And they're against animal agriculture and things like that. Farming, cattle farming, ranching, and things like that. They're against that kind of industry and economy. But at the same time, they can be vicious enough to kill animals. And I think it comes down to they don't have a sense of humor, especially about their children being in danger. Charles Hall talks a fair bit about this in his books. But they can and do harm pets. But anyway, yeah, the claws. So they've got claws on their hands, or not bears, the prosthetic claws. So these suits I call them boa suits because of the Villas Boas case. Callie Cale saw suits like this in South Belgrave when she was abducted in Australia in 1992. Belgrave was where I had that experience in the tent as well, where it's the same part of the world where I had that experience when I was 20 and they were running around the tent and stuff. And Chris Bledsoe's seen them with the glowing red eyes and his son in the Fayetteville incident in 2007 in North Carolina. And they saw them galloping on all fours as well, which is another thing Charles Hall talks about. Another thing I've seen them doing, especially when I was a kid. I saw the little ones galloping on all fours. They have longer arms compared to their bodies than ours, and they gallop. It's more natural for them to move quadrupedally as well as bipedally. So that's a. If you see a mudgeonner in the world, they're more likely to be dressed in a boa suit than without. This is how they move about covertly in our world. And some of their other technologies. Do you have any questions about that, dude? Before I move on
because I mean, you said that they cloak and then they have like this claw thing, and I know that in another interview you had mentioned very similar to the Predator, and it is very similar to the Predator that they have this mask that comes off and they can cloak, and they also have claws. The Predator, even the new movie Prey, the new Predator, you see the claws.
Oh, yeah. It's a cool movie. I like the new Predator.
Yeah, it's a dope movie. They got it back to where it was before because they kind of went away from the original Predator. But Villas-Boas, where was he from?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
South America?
Brazil it wasn't. Yeah, Brazil. Yeah, he's from Brazil. Okay. Yeah, South America. Yeah, but I can't remember where in South America. Right. Yeah, Portuguese.
Right. So if you get a chance, if you go on my YouTube, check out the episode number 9 with this individual named Chaz of the Dead, because he's a paranormal investigator. He found out about this group, Tall Whites, in South America called the Friendship, and he actually went out to South America to do work and to investigate, and he found some interesting things. So if you get a chance, listen to that and contact him if you feel you want to get some answers. There's another individual too. I don't know if you're aware of him. He has a site named UFOs Over Vegas. His name is Steve Barone. Have you heard of him?
Yeah. I think I'm not subscribed to him at the moment, but I have been in the past because I started up a new YouTube account. I haven't gotten around to subscribing to everyone I used to be. But yeah, he does some pretty impressive footage filming, doesn't he? Yeah.
I contacted him because of one of his pieces of footage that reminded me of the incident that I had. And I reached out to him, and we have a friendship. But he believes that those crafts that he's seeing are the Tall Whites that Charles Hall talks about.
Right. Yeah.
So
they probably are.
Yeah. And those are some connections that can be made. But
yeah, very cool.
So what are some of like the scenarios where, because you say that they're very advanced technologically, so they could be shadow people, they could be fairies, they could be Sasquatch, they could be a lot of the things that people think that they see. What other experiences that you've heard of from other people that you are like, okay, that's not a Bigfoot that you're talking to me about, or maybe that you've heard somebody talk about, like that's not Bigfoot, like the Patterson Gimlin film, or let's say, for instance, what other scenarios like that where like, oh, that's the Magina?
Yeah, well, the Sierra Sounds is one that I talk about a fair bit. That's definitely the Magina language
Wow.
and code switching like that, where you have it because their natural language to our ears, like our Western ears, sounds kind of Japanese or Korean.
Yes.
And sometimes the Sierra sounds are called samurai chatter as well. They're known as that. So Al Berry and Ron Moorhead that recorded those sounds in the Sierra Nevada mountains, California, in the 70s. And they almost always they're associated with Bigfoot. So people either say they're a hoax, or if they're real, then they're evidence for Sasquatch. But I've heard them making these sounds, all different kinds of sounds. It's definitely them. And you can find, Charles Hall as well talks about animal-like sounds that the tall whites made when he heard them. He interpreted that as being their true general natural language. So chirping and whistling and growling and barking and whinnying like horses, neighing, sounding particularly like meadowlarks. He described them as sounding, but also growling and that kind of stuff. That is what I call camo cant, which is like cryptolects, which is them mimicking wildlife sounds as camouflage language to confuse us, basically, if we're in the vicinity. Contrived linguistic systems, they're based on animal noises. When you actually hear them speaking in their own language, it sounds much more like our Homo sapiens languages, but it kind of sounds Japanese or something. So the Sierra sounds, if your viewers are familiar with them, if they're not, I really recommend. You can find versions of it on YouTube. I think the recordings done by Ron Moorhead and Al Berry, but very like deep resonant sounds, like a anime samurai or something like that. That really sort of ultra masculine sound when people are speaking Japanese in a really sort of deep way, like a samurai. But also code switching to more animalistic sounds, so hooting and roaring and twittering and all this kind of stuff. So that's one in particular. And I got in contact with Ron Moorhead about that as well. Like,
what was
so
his
I found
response?
out about the Sierra sounds. Well, I was being very annoying, and he's such a nice guy that he was very, very gracious, and he responded to me and he said, when I said to him, hey, I'm very, very sure that this is not Sasquatch, that this is Mudgina, this is tall whites, and I sent him some information. I particularly sent him information about the Soria abductions in Spain, where a guy was in 1978 was taken on board a craft piloted by tall beings with huge blue eyes that had long faces, long pointed chins. And that particular individual, Julio Fernandez, gave where he's actually in 1978 giving an excellent description. He said that are you still there, dude? Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
You froze. You froze for like 10 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe someone's using the microwave inside. It's near the Wi-Fi router. So.
Yeah.
I usually put a piece of paper over it saying no microwave for now.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So Ron Moorhead. So I got in contact with him, and I said to him, this is the deal. What do you reckon? And he said, well, he had experienced elements of. I'm paraphrasing him here. He didn't say exactly this, but he was saying he experienced high technologies, evidence of high technologies as well. So they'd be hearing what they thought was Bigfoot. They'd look and they couldn't see them. So there's the sounds coming, but it's like they're invisible. But also UFOs and orbs. So this is in conjunction with these kinds of things. And one time he said he saw what he described when he went back to the place is looking like the blade of a lightsaber without the handle, just the light, like it's scanning a few feet above the ground. And also the sounds of hum, like a hum coming from in the mountain, which is an element that's often repeated in cases, in other tall white or Mudgina cases I've identified, where they're facilities in the earth, you can hear them make humming and things like that. So I'd say that right there where they were recording those sounds is an underground dwelling or habitation of the Mudgina CTs. And he said, well, he finds that an interesting idea, and maybe I'm right. That's all he said. Because he said all he knows about them is they definitely had big feet, because there were a couple of prints. But the thing is that Mudgina have dirty big feet as well, especially the older ones, and he was saying as well that there'd be poltergeist activity. It'd sound like their camp was being ripped up because the guys, Ron Moorhead and crew, would be hanging out in a little cubby, like a fort they'd made with heavy logs and branches inside an existing tree. I think a hollowed out tree. They'd build this and feel safer in there and be recording while they're hiding in there at night while all of these sounds are being made out in the forests. And they'd think they were hearing their camp around their fire just being ripped to pieces and stuff being thrown all over the place. And in the morning, there'd be nothing changed. Which is a very, very interesting effect as well. So kind of like poltergeist activity without any residual effect. But yeah, so Ron Moorhead, like I said, he's a wonderful bloke, and he was very gracious. And I presented that to him, and he said, well, you might be right, because of what's Sasquatch doing with advanced technologies like UFOs and stuff like that as well. And that he didn't actually see what was making the sounds anyway. But you see, that's if they're wearing these boa suits, you wouldn't see them anyway. Well, sometimes you can sort of see a bit of a shimmer, but more usually than that, they're completely invisible. You wouldn't even know they were there, except perhaps still casting shadows occasionally and things like that. But yeah, so the Sierra Sounds is one for sure.
Anything else? Any other anything? Any other stories out there that you're like, yeah, that's Magina?
I'm just thinking,
like Chupacabra, like maybe Chupacabra stuff.
I'm not that familiar. I know that the Utes and their
skinwalkers, yes.
Skinwalkers. I think skinwalkers are them. Yeah. The idea that they can mimic, like people talk about in the mythology, they can mimic other animals, they can present themselves as animals, moving about on all fours, and also like, and particular in Skinwalker Ranch as well, like that case of Skinwalker Ranch, in my opinion, Skinwalker Ranch is right there near an underground habitation, Mudgina tall white habitation, and they even reported, in the Skinwalker Ranch case, they even reported the ranching family that were there before National Institute of Discovery Science and Bob Bigelow bought the property and whatnot. But when the family that was there, that it all sort of started from, they would see the RV-like craft that Charles Hall describes being present at Indian Springs when he was there. That he'd see these white, look like buses without wheels, or like a recreational vehicle levitating and moving at high speed across the desert and over the mountains.
Like
and
the Tic Tacs?
Yeah, like Tic Tacs. Yeah, I suppose nowadays people would probably be more familiar with the idea of the Tic Tac. And Charles Hall called them RVs, but in the Skinwalker Ranch case, that family called them RVs as well. There's RVs parked on their property, and they'd go to chase them, and they'd move away. They couldn't, they'd chase them again, and then they'd lift up and go over the top of hedges and over the top of fences. And that these RVs were piloted by giant men in dark clothing and dark uniforms, would leave huge footprints. So this is them again, the Mudgina, and this is one kind of craft that they have. And yeah, probably the Tic Tac phenomenon is involved with that as well. That these RV craft may well be the Tic Tacs that have been in the media.
That's crazy.
Yeah. and that's the thing. Like that kind of high strangeness and paranormal activity. Like people say, what's the deal there? Like the people at Skinwalker Ranch, Skinwalker Ranch has got UFOs and orbs and poltergeist activity and trickster elements and cloaking beings like the Predator and
cryptids.
Also, and big, huge people piloting these craft and all this kind of stuff. And it seems to me like it was psychological warfare being launched on that particular family to move them on.
So you
yeah. Sorry.
so you think that the series that's going on right now, these people that are doing the investigations, you think that the Majina are like doing these things to them to get them the hell out of there?
Um, I I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that I don't watch that show. I haven't watched any of the episodes. I know the show you mean, that there's an ongoing investigation and they're
Right.
making a series out of it, Skinwalker Ranch. My knowledge of Skinwalker Ranch sort of begins and ends with Hunt for the Skinwalker by Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, and the Corbell documentary that was based on that
Right.
book. But the newer stuff, and so I'm familiar with NIDS, the scientists at NIDS, led by Colm Kelleher, financed by Bob Bigelow, and financed in part, we find out now, by the Department of Defense apparently as well. But which they've revealed in their more recent book, Skinwalker at the Pentagon. But yeah, I'm familiar with that. So the occurrences of that original family, and then Colm Kelleher and co. Launching investigations, and but not with the new stuff. So I can't really answer what would be happening there. I know with the NIDS group that the paranormal activity sort of ran dry. Like the scientists, like the family itself that have been there, have been experiencing massive amounts of paranormal activity and cattle mutilations and tricks being played on them, and their bulls disappearing and then being found in a corral all packed in like sardines, and like just messing with them, taking, you're digging a hole, you turn away and you turn back again and your shovel's gone, then you find it the next day in the top of a tree. And these weird experiences, that the family was having, and the craft, all different kinds and all that kind of stuff. But then when Colm Kelleher got there with his group, it all sort of dried up, and they were there for a long time, but didn't really have anywhere. So they had some interesting things happen to them, that's for sure, but nowhere near the level. Almost like the Majina decided, well, if you are interacting with scientists too much, you're encouraging them. Whereas if you want to expel a family from a house, you scare them and send them away. But scientists want you to be providing them with data. So then to not provide them with as much, and then that's how you make them go away. That was what I was sort of thinking, maybe tentative hypothesis. But in this new series, if you could tell me, dude, so you've got all these people at Skinwalker Ranch trying to work out what's going on and wanting to experience UFOs, and presumably, and high strangeness. And are they actually finding a lot of that happening, or is it sort of
okay? Yeah, what's happening is that so you had Bob Bigelow, he sold to this guy named Brandon Fugel, who's a multimillionaire, and so he has a research team there. And I guess they were having things going on, but they weren't able to quantify or get to the point of what all these things were happening. So now they have this science doctor. I don't know if he's a doctor, but he's a Taylor. Anyway, he shows up, and there's things that are happening, but you're telling me the stuff about the Majina, and it's like, now it's starting to make sense to me now. Especially considering the things that are happening to them. For instance, they've had incidents where they've had cattle die. They've had video where they can't tell what's attacking the cattle, but they have video of cattle being attacked and having marks on them, like something with claws scratched it. Whenever they do digging, something happens to an individual. So one of the shows,
that's a big no-no, isn't it? The digging there, that was in the book as well. No digging.
The digging is the biggest part. So they start digging, and then one of the individuals, his head, the skin on his head started to separate from his skull. So he went to the hospital, and they have had x-rays of that. And then the scientist that they brought in, Taylor, he got hit with like some sort of like radiation. He had like marks on his face and on his hand. So anytime you dig, something happens. So then they did like ground penetrating scanners, and they believe there might be a craft underneath. They think it's a craft, but from what you're telling me, it might be a facility that's underneath, you know? So they're at the point where they're getting close to finding out what it is, because they found this pocket of rocks, and if you were to remove the rocks, you could find a hole or into a cave system. They're trying to get into that cave system, and there's something, and it might be to their detriment if they wind up doing that. But yeah, everything that you've been talking about is crazy. It matches with what they've been going through, and that they're seeing craft too. You know, just things like tic tac sort of crafts just will pop up when they're doing experiments and disappear. You know, they drop like these. I may be explaining it wrong, but they try to drop these detectors off of a helicopter to see if it can scan what's in the air, because there's a certain area where technology malfunctions. If you send up a rocket, it'll veer off, and there's a certain area there that they're trying to figure out, like why is it disrupting signals, and it's I don't even know how to. You'd have to watch it if you're interested.
Yeah, I will have to have a look then. I remember in the Colin Kelleher George Knapp book, Hunt for the Skinwalker, they're talking about how the family would see craft flying straight into the mesa, into the side, boom, like they'd become intangible or something and just fly straight in and things like that. There's something there subterranean, but they are really playing with their lives doing that kind of stuff, in my opinion. Some people, if they try to break into some kind of cave system, that's not going to be good, I don't think. The Mudgeonner as well, what they do is they'll make your life hell and haunt you as well, and give you bad dreams and give you bad associations with places and things like that. Hopefully they're steered away from offending the Mudgeonner. Like, hopefully the Mudgeonner are delicate enough with them so that they can steer them away by manipulating them in their sleep or whatever, or suggestion and stuff like that, to turn them away from really playing with that kind of stuff. Because they can be lethal. They can be homicidal. I think they've killed a lot of people over the years, you know. In my opinion, especially like the hunters in Missing 411 kind of, you know, David Paulides, you know, does different categories of different people, different sorts of people going missing. You know, sometimes, you know, like children or professionals, you know, like doctors or academics or athletes, or different kinds of people that go missing in national and state parks and wilderness areas and stuff like that. But he focuses on, at least in one documentary and in one of his books, hunters. And hunters that are armed, entering into wilderness areas where there's Mudgeonner habitations and children, with aggressive and malicious intent, even if they're shooting at animals or whatever. That's people taking their lives in their, you know, like, that's really dangerous stuff. And I think these guys, by the sound of it, at Skinwalker Ranch, are putting their lives at risk. It depends on, you know, the thing is, I'm surprised the Mudgeonner, if it is them, and I'm pretty convinced it is, why they haven't left the area, and while people are interested in it, just abandoned it for the time being. Why they still bother giving them paranormal activity, almost like it's encouraging in some way. But so that'll be interesting, dude. I'll have to have a little bit of a peek at that series then, because I have to admit that I've just skipped that one. Because I was sort of thinking maybe it's sort of a bit infotainment and it looks like it's a bit silly. I've seen some ads and stuff.
It is. A lot of these shows are. I mean, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you know, there's a show called UFO Witness, for instance, that's run by an individual named Ben Hansen, and he interviewed someone that I know about their experiences, and then took that information and perverted it and switched it. So for entertainment purposes. So there are elements in the show Skinwalker that are entertainment based that, you know, is bullshit, you know. Yeah. But for the most part, they are getting close to something. I don't know how it's going to affect them. You would know better than me if what they're doing is really bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what they should do, really. And, you know, like, I've heard Colin Kelleher being interviewed on numerous occasions talking about how he doesn't want to communicate with the phenomenon. He doesn't want to communicate with it. He wants to study it. And he also said, you know, which is a scientific process. You know, you don't want to inject yourself into the subject. You want to stay at a distance. You want to be as objective as possible. But the problem with this is they are people, and they respond much more well to polite social interaction. You know, just for instance, you know, there's ghost hunters online that have much more paranormal interaction with the Mudgeonor than Colin Callagher ever has, I'm sure. Not because they don't approach them as cold scientists, which can be offensive to the Mudgeonor, you know, not approaching them as though they're other people, but just being callous and trying to break into their cavern systems, for example, or whatever, without even asking permission, without even setting up any kind of attempt for interaction of some kind, without sitting around and projecting thoughts out and saying, would it be okay if we go here or go there and all that kind of stuff. Colin Callagher says, oh, no, we don't want to interact with them. He also said, oh, you want to be careful interacting with things because you might attract their attention and then they might be negative entities or something like that. And it's like, well, you're going to get their attention if you're messing with their world. You know, if you're there at their doorstep with just sticking things in the ground and making a nuisance of yourself, you know. Yeah, like there's a channel I always recommend. I don't know if you've heard of, dude, but Twin Paranormal, a group of dudes in Nevada that have, not quite sure where they're actually based, but they go around. They travel around the US in general, I think, but most of the stuff's in Nevada, and they Twin Paranormal on YouTube. And in my opinion, most of their interactions are with Mudgeon, even though they themselves interpret it as being ghosts or demons or skinwalkers or whatever, you know. And yeah, how they approach situations and how they get good responses is they basically introduce themselves. They talk about how they don't want to offend and they're not here to hurt anyone and they just want to have a chat. I mean, and that's the way to go, as you would with anyone, you know.
Right.
So these dudes, they'd find out huge amounts of, well, probably, I suggest they'd find out a lot more information if they actually approached the phenomenon and started trying to interact with it and engage it on a personal level. But I suppose they're not understanding necessarily that it has a personality that would, you know, respond to that. But if they gave that a go, I think they'd have a lot more, you know, data come out of this, of the interaction. And they certainly wouldn't have, you know, physical side effects and all this kind of stuff, or it looks like they're really being injured in some ways. They're being warned, you know.
Yes. To me, I think that's what it is. It's a warning.
Yeah.
A warning. I have a couple of more things before I let you go, Ryan, because I know you have things to do. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, okay, so, you know, like I said, I was into the UFO topic since I was young, you know. But when I saw Whitley Strieber's, the cover to Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, and I saw that alien, it really didn't sit right with me for some reason. And then years later, I found out that Aleister Crowley was in contact with some being called Lamb, and he drew a picture of it. And that as well really didn't sit well with me when I saw that picture. I felt like a familiar connection to that. Yeah. And then there was this thing called the Alien Race book, and a bunch of pictures in there of these different alien races. But you, on one of your episodes, I think OR number 71, brought to our attention these pictures of these beings that look familiar to me, and that it doesn't sit well with me. Is that what they look like?
Yeah, the photos that I've got that I've put on my channel, and I'm going to talk about them in the book I'm writing at the moment. That's definitely the Mudgeonor. Those three shots. There's three photos. I came across one online and thought, holy moly. I couldn't quite see the color of the eyes because it was sort of the color was dulled off.
Right. I saw those pictures in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, really? Did you?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Because I came across them maybe a year ago or something like that. Oh, that's really interesting.
They've been around.
Okay. Yeah, that's them. You know, like, and I've been sketching them, drawing them. This has been what I've been seeing for years. And to actually see them like that, photos of them. Now, am I 100% sure it's them. Well, I'm as close as you can get to that. If it turns out they're mannequins down the road at someone, and someone can prove they're not real, that would blow me away, because I'd be incredibly surprised. But then I'd be thinking, whoever manufactured these mannequins or this fake has seen them, because they're perfect.
Right.
So yeah, and the length of the neck as they get older, they get really like quite long necks.
Right.
And the shape of the face. That's tall whites, but so I came across one of them, and then so I did that Google reverse image thing where you can search for other the photos in other areas online, and I found the three then, where what looks like to me two females and a male, and yeah, that's them. And then also I messed with the color, because I was like, now they're going to have blue eyes, but I can't really quite see. And so I brought the color out in general. I brought the color up, and then you can see that they do have blue eyes. So two of them, you can see they got blue eyes, and the other one, you can't really still see what the color was. But yeah, for sure, that's them. And I think the Aleister Crowley one, the lamb or lum, the entity he claimed to have summoned or interacted with or dropped in on him when he was doing a working or something. That to me looks more like what are called P24s, a different kind of future human race, which is like the Skinny Bob ET kind of thing.
Yes.
I don't know if Skinny Bob's real or it's a fake, but again, I would suggest if it's a fake, someone's has done a very good job of recreating what one of the races actually looks like. And Lamb sort of strikes me more as looking like one of them and less like a tall white, and I believe Crowley said that being was quite small anyway. But the esotericist Rudolf Steiner, educator and esotericist, that invented the anthroposophy religion and stuff, he made sculptures and drawings and things of beings as well that strike me as being Mudgeonor. They look like elderly Mudgeonor, the older ones that have really long, because as they get quite tall, they get elongated faces with long
their
chins.
features draw out more.
Yeah. And also the hands, like he's done a sculpture of what he calls an Ahrimanic being, and it has the fingers all split out. And I think, it might be a coincidence, but to me they look like he's seen this, what I've seen, that he may have been a Mudgeonor experiencer himself. And he again was sort of like Crowley, like an esotericist, occultist, but yeah.
In your research, how and this is including the Mudgeonor and their brothers, so to speak, how many races are here or have visited here? Are there more than just them two? Because far you've named 4 of them so far.
Yeah, 4. Well, as far as I understand, there's 4, and they're all in the same way, that kind of interdimensional human or future human, depending on how you want to interpret it. Now, I do understand that ufology is full of, it's full of a lot of things, but it's full of a lot of different kinds of races. People, yeah. But, yeah, I think most of it is, in my personal opinion, but most of the sort of folklore, UFO folklore online is a bit of bull. But yeah, I think, like the idea of there being true aliens with an evolutionary history beyond Earth that are coming here with advanced craft and visiting us and things like that. And maybe that kind of thing's going on, but it's these 4 races are the most important, and they're the ones that have been abducting us and interacting with us, and that people think of. When people think of close encounter events, they're thinking of these dudes, this particular 4, really. And yeah, I wouldn't like to say, of course, that there's no such thing as advanced, sophisticated beings other than that visiting us. Who am I to say that? But these are the main ones, and they are interested in us because they are us. That's where it's like it's a family thing. Whereas other beings that are from other advanced worlds in other constellations in other solar systems visiting us, would they have that intense interest and fascination with us, an obsession almost with us, when they don't have that kind of link with us in any way? Who knows? But I think not, probably. But yeah.
So do the Majina, do they live everywhere on this planet, or only in certain places on this planet?
They
I live in Florida. Are they here in Florida? Because I have experiences here. So
I think they have habitations everywhere. Under the oceans in particular. There's a habitation here under Bass Strait, in the continental shelf under Bass Strait, like we were talking about earlier. They habitations, underground habitations that lie dormant when it's cold. They chase the warmth. They move around. Charles Hallwood talked about this as well, and other people have. And this is what they've said to me as well. They move around. So, Charles Hall would talk about how they disappear from Nevada in the winter, and then they'd return again, and that kind of. He presumed they were leaving the Earth and things like that. But Charles Hall had a different understanding. Charles Hall presumed that they were true aliens from elsewhere, right. And he said he didn't know where they were from, and he'd asked them, and they were evasive. They wouldn't respond. But he suspected they might be from Arcturus system, and he gave a couple of reasons for that in his writing. But it never occurred to him they might be indigenous to Earth in any way. Even though they were almost identical to us. But still, under the oceans, and Florida, I'm sure, everywhere really. They have. Now there were 1 million of them, they said a few years ago. More recently, they said to me there are now 12 million of us, which means that there's been some kind of interaction again with their own original home, with their own timeline. And the understanding I have of that is that as timelines become less similar to each other and they become divorced from each other, it can be difficult to navigate your way back. This is something that Dan Burish had said as well. He thought there was a possibility that they couldn't get back, that some of them had been left here as a voluntary contingent to stay, but most had left, and now they couldn't get home even if they wanted to. But it would appear that that's not the case, that there's been a huge amount, an influx of them. I mean, not a huge amount compared to the populations of us, which are billions, but still 12 million now as opposed to just what had been one. So in the last half a year or something like that, all of a sudden it's just a lot more. And they'll be dormant. So if it's cold weather where you are in your part of the world, you're less likely to have interactions with them than when it's your summer.
So do you see them in the future, near future, like living with us, like revealing themselves eventually and just living with us?
I think I'm pretty sure that they will reveal themselves, even though I think it's probably going to be a slow, drip-fed sort of process. We're being prepared for their existence, I think, through television, enculturated, baptized in like understandings about multiverses and time travel, where you can't really turn the television on anymore without it being like kids shows, science fiction shows, superhero franchises and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Absolutely obsessed with concepts relating to the multiverse at the moment, and have been for like about 10 years or something now. There's always been a little bit of that, over the past however many years, decades or whatever, but it seems to be really ramping up. And the kids of today are just completely fluent in ideas about multiverses, and understanding that, them as a concept and having that in their vocabulary. Whereas even just like 20 years ago, it wasn't a thing. People didn't really talk about that as much. People would be more interested in the idea of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the beings that are visiting us simply being from other planets elsewhere coming to us, and not really having an understanding of the possibility of other worlds right here but alongside us that they can leap from. But I think that's a sign that we're being sort of immersed in understandings that are changing our worldview, that will mean we'll have more of a positive acceptance of them eventually when they do reveal themselves. But I think it has to be a fairly slow process because they could do a lot of damage culturally, religiously, economically, and all this if they just sort of dropped in. But they will eventually, yeah. And the idea of them living side by side with us, I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that though. I suspect anyway that they'll always be separate and apart in some way. Even if we have an amicable relationship with them, we know they're there, we know where they are. We'll end up being. It won't be that you go to the restaurant and there's Mudgeonor ordering before you or something like that. I don't
That'll be
think
cool.
it'll ever get to that stage. It would be cool, yeah.
It'd be awesome.
I suspect not, but I think what I see is happening probably it'll be things like there'll be understandings that we don't go to certain places at certain times of the year, that there'll be mountainous regions in certain parts of the world that for certain months of the year we are warned we really shouldn't go there, and we know why. We know that they're there, and it becomes sort of accepted in our culture, like it was, I think, to some societies, as we were talking about, like centuries ago, where they sort of had agreements with them, and knew what to do and what not to do, so everyone could not offend each other and all that kind of thing. And also, them getting genetic material from us or interbreeding with us will become hopefully more open, where there's volunteers rather than being all covert and them sneaking through our world like poltergeists and dark shadowy demonic entities that we don't understand exactly what they are, and succubi and incubi and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
Yeah, that they'll end up being acknowledged as being in our world but not actually be like living next door literally.
So
is what I think, probably. Yeah.
So to end it all, brother, thanks again for doing this. What's in the future for Ryan Musgrave Evans, man? What do you got next? Another book, documentary?
Yeah, well, I'm
America's
writing.
Got Talent. What do you?
I'm writing another book, yeah, and Philip Mantle, English ufologist Philip Mantle, has his publishing company, Flying Disc Press, and I've had a yarn to him about the new book, and he's like, yeah, he's going to publish it early next year.
Awesome.
It's not finished yet. I've told him that I'll send it his way for him to have a peek at sometime in November. That's what I'm aiming at having it finished by. But a lot's going into that, a lot of my spare time, a lot of my focus, a lot of research. And yeah, that's what my mind's bent on at the moment. And I'm barely thinking, I'm really nerding into that. I'm not really thinking about much else, to tell you the truth. So yeah, but thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah, no worries, man. The last question I have, because it's gonna escape me and it's gonna bother me. You wrote a book already, and you're writing another book. What do the Mudgeonor think about? Do they know that you're doing this? What do they think about that? Yeah,
well, I think that's part of the holding me to the bargain thing and all that kind of stuff as well, where they wanted me that I had a role to play, and that's what I sort of thought of like as being a tool to them in a certain way, of assisting them in some kind of very slow disclosure, as being a part of the puzzle, one of the cogs, in the system, and trying to prove to people beyond reasonable doubt through profiling and pattern recognition through different cases that they exist, and establishing that. And yeah, so they are okay with the books, and also with me doing my channel and things like that. Just I wouldn't be doing it unless they were, and they encourage me and things like that. And I wouldn't even really be interested in UFOs and ET, kind of like ufology and whatnot, or even probably any more folklore and things like that as much, if it weren't for them, and if it weren't for them allowing me to remember all of these experiences, which is another aspect as well. If you're having experiences and you're remembering them, they don't usually make mistakes, although I think they sometimes do make mistakes, but they don't usually make mistakes. So if you've had an experience that you think is an ET related thing or a haunting or something like that, and you know what's happening and you're conscious of it, they're allowing you to remember, because they could very easily just suppress all the thoughts and memories about it, and there'd be no issue, So I was always cognizant of that I'm being allowed to remember these experiences, and they're kind of like a gift in that way, which I'm very grateful for. If they expressed to me that I wasn't supposed to be doing it, I wouldn't, because there's no point then. I'm only doing it if I think it's beneficial to them and to us and all that kind of stuff. So if they were to say to me, no, you got it wrong, why are you writing these books about us? You stop. I'd be like, oh yeah, whatever. I'm only doing it because you asked me to do it. Like, I
understand.
But, yeah.
Last question, I promise.
Yeah.
I still have my own experiences. I want to know what's going on. Like, how do I approach? What would be my approach?
Well, I'd recommend reaching out, in the sense of thinking about them, asking them what's going on, suggesting to them if you're interested in this, having more experiences, or if you're already having experiences, them allowing you to remember more of them, and just basically communicating with them in a way that is respectful and polite, but not to the point of it being like formal. They don't seem to necessarily, in my opinion, in my personal experience, they don't respond well to high level formality. They seem to respond well to sort of like a human interaction that, although you're being polite enough and you're not being aggressive and things like that, it's still on a friendly level, like just chatting to them, if you, in the same way that you'd talk to a person that, it's a Homo sapiens that you're just being friendly with, and that kind of stuff, and not putting them too much on a pedestal, but also not being too negative towards them, just treating them as a human,
right?
Which they are really kinds of humans, I call the Mudgeonah Homo Orionis because of their relationship with Orion, and whether or not they're closely enough genetically to us to really be like a subspecies, like Homo sapiens Orionis, instead of and then we would be in contradistinction Homo sapiens sapiens, or whether they are different enough to actually be considered a different species, Homo Orionis. Either way, they're still the same genus. Like, they're still hominins, they're still humans, and they respond well if you treat them that way,
Awesome, my brother. This was awesome stuff. Send me, if you can, all the links that you would want people to go to, and you can send me a little picture too of yourself so I can put in my thumbnail for the YouTube channel. And once I'm done, cool. I'll send you the link to that. I'll send you also the links to the interviews that I've done as well. But thank you very much.
Sweet, yeah.
And keep me so much, in the loop, man, with your book. When it drops, I'd like to have you back on if you're willing to come back on.
Oh, yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, this has been great fun, dude. Thanks so much.
Yeah, brother. Keep the beard, man.
And what you have to say, you've blown me away with your experiences as well. That's so cool. And your relationship, your connection to Nellis and stuff.
Right. But there's people out there, trust me, that have way better stories. That some of them don't come out. Like, I know some people that have told me, we'll talk again and I'll tell you some stories sure. Now I'm thinking I know are Mudgeonah based, but we'll talk.
Very
all right,
cool.
Brother?
Cool. Okay. Thanks so much.
See you later, my man. Peace.
Thanks.